you've heard, if you're the audience, a little bit about Joel's expertise. You've obviously got a gauge that he's across at least American politics. You've got a taste of what he's given. I'd like you guys to go check out Joel Jammal's YouTube channel. It's just called Joel Jammal. He runs a bunch of different shows. But what I want to ask you, Joel, is that you have only been, I would say, regularly active with your own content on YouTube for, what, 3 or 4 months, something?
5 months, yeah.
5 months, right? And you've grown to, I just checked, almost 7,500 subscribers in that time, which is just phenomenal growth. We had you meet with our social media guy who we've just got on board with, and he says you don't really need to change anything. You're growing, so well yourself. You've got an interest in politics and culture and a few different things, but what I want to get from you is for you to tell the people, what is your expertise? What do you want to do with your channel? Where do you want to grow to? Where do you see yourself as? I know this has become a full-time thing for you. You've been able to transition from a hobby into a full-time thing. I want everyone to start understanding, even for my sake, what you hope to do with your influence and your channel and your videos.
Sure. So just to give people context, the whole reason I started the channel, I never wanted to be a YouTuber. I thought, I learnt everything I learnt from following politics. I used to be a progressive in 2016. That's when I first started taking notice, after I left school. And then I became a conservative. And, I followed this stuff, but I never thought that, I learnt what I learnt from listening to other YouTubers. We didn't have a shortage of YouTubers. I'm sure we'd all agree. We could all watch Tim Pool and learn the same crap. And
well, we had the classics back in the day. We had Crowder, Milo,
Yeah.
Shapiro,
Gavin
McInnes.
Yeah,
even Jimmy Dore.
Exactly. It's
I'm
like,
a big fan of Jimmy Dore.
yeah, Jimmy's great. And look, it's like, why do we need to add more YouTubers? I mean, it's like, just listen. I'll just recommend them. They're big enough. They do their due diligence. But what happened was that what actually ended up happening was that I've realised there's no one in Australia doing it properly. There's heaps of people doing it, don't get me wrong, and they're still around today, but they're not doing it properly. They just need to tweak a few things. But we've also got a situation where I was employed, as you guys know. I worked in construction. I'd worked in it for 10 years.
Bit of an ethnic industry, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Be careful of your Middle Eastern builders.
It's an eyebrow-heavy industry,
we
say.
It sure is. It sure is. And it's very ethnic. There's a lot of people there. But I was working as an assistant development manager more recently, and as you know, I lost my job due to the lockdowns that happened.
Kind of a blessing in disguise, in a sense.
Well, it depends whose blessing it was. It definitely wasn't a blessing for the media, the mainstream media, and no, honestly, and
Joe Biden,
and not just the media. On top of that, and the politicians as well. I mean, now we're in a situation where I was like, you're gonna take my job with your idiocy.
They've let a criminal out of the supermax.
Exactly. I was happy.
Voldemort's out of Azkaban.
I was more than happy building stuff and moving paperwork from here to there on a desk.
It's John Wick.
Yeah, it's John Wick. They killed my dog. All I wanted was, my
keep your job.
Get my job.
Gladiator. They've killed his wife and his kid, and he just wanted a little plot of land.
I just wanted to kill the man. Baba Yaga. And then they were like, oh no, we're going to impose these idiocy sort of, with the idiocy, they just introduced these lockdowns, and I was like, okay, let's get the one thing straight. You don't do a good job, and we need to fix this. Otherwise, we're going to lose our nation. And it all goes back to, and it all goes back to this case. Anyone from the Middle East will tell you this, that, it's only a matter of time before the nation deteriorates. That's the trajectory we're on. All things being unchanged, we're on a downward spiral, even now.
Do you think that's why, just pause you there, do you think that's why I would say I'm going to say ethnics, because there's not a better word for it.
Yeah.
Arabics.
Yeah.
I would say you could define their kind of avatar as usually religious and usually conservative, usually hardworking.
Yeah.
Do you think the reason why all of those things are, in terms of relation to politics, particularly conservative, is because they've seen their own countries have issues and they don't want this to happen in their new country?
Absolutely. Listen to Thomas Sowell, the great professor. I know Alex is a big fan, but Thomas Sowell's great. He explains that culture is a very it's not biological. There's a bit of biology, but it's mostly cultural. What happens, what makes up culture is the environment you're in. Unfortunately, if we're going to take Lebanon as an example, unfortunately with the Lebanese, and let's include the Jews, why not? They're in a situation where
get added in.
They always get added in. They're hyper-productive. Why are they hyper-productive? Well, in the case of the Lebanese, it's such a corrupt cesspit in Lebanon. It's not socialism. It's not fascism. It's just corruption. It's terrible. So the moment they can't get ahead unless it's corruption, they can't get their title, their name to own a piece of land without corruption. They can't get anything done. So they come to bring them to Australia, and they see how easy it is to make money. It's like making hotcakes. It's so easy. They can't get enough of it. They're like, I want a house for my kids. I want a house for this and that and that and that. And that's why they're so productive. They have that hunger, because in Lebanon, they can't do that. They just can't. It doesn't matter how hard they work. They just can't do it.
And a good case of that in America is actually Jorge Masvidal, for those who are
in the
familiar with
UFC.
the UFC.
Yeah.
His dad came over from Cuba fleeing communism, and so Jorge now goes across America campaigning for Trump.
Yeah.
Like a bunch of other UFC fighters.
Yeah.
Just because he says, like, you see that happen in your own country, and then you see the beginning of it happening in the country you've adopted, which you love so much.
Yeah.
It just really messes you up, like, psychologically, and
No,
you feel like you need to go out and make a difference.
Exactly. But hang on, there is a downside of this, though. You have to make sure with these people that come in, and I'll use this example because I'm Syrian and I can say it. But the problem is, when you bring these people in from these countries, yes, you can come here, you can flourish, you can do whatever the hell you want within the law. But the problem is, you've got to respect the law. And it's sort of a running joke, that you've got to watch out for those dodgy Lebanese or Syrian builders. There's Middle Eastern builders, because they tend to cut corners, like in the Middle East. So you have to be careful with that. However, once you get over that hurdle, you will find that these people will be some of the most productive, hardworking people you'll find, and you really see that in the different cultures.
Now, Andy and Alex, when you guys are smoking a sheesh, make sure the other one who's talking speaks directly into the mic. But Joel, you're talking about your construction job, and how it's not a blessing for the media.
Yeah, it's not a blessing for the media. Look, the situation with the channel was, so I started the channel. I wanted to put the media out of their job. I know we all know the mainstream media, they've got diminishing, sort of viewership. People know they're lying to them. They know that they need to be getting news from somewhere else. They just need the other place. And I was like, well, look, maybe I can offer that. I can't do a weekly show, not yet, but I can at least help people put this into perspective. And so I'm not a news show. I'm more of just a political commentator. I sort of piece together. I still rely on the mainstream media to give me the facts, whatever the hell they are, and make sense of the BS to try and filter it out for the people. But most people, they don't actually have the skills to be like, okay, what's actually going on? Whereas I've done this so many times in the cesspool that is America, in sorting out what the truth is, that it's a piece of cake when I come to Australia, because Australia hasn't deteriorated as much. Australia's at chapter 3, America's at chapter 10, and the UK's at like chapter 14. They're screwed right now.
And so your channel has been, I would say, a great platform for giving voices to people who wouldn't have usually got runs in mainstream media. Two easy cases on your channel is Riccardo Bosi and Romeo George's. Why don't you give the people a quick kind of snapshot of who they are, why your channel is kind of giving them that space to say their views, and then also tell us about your trip that you did to Queensland with Ricardo off the back of your work with them.
Yeah, sure. So look, this might be a better way to introduce them. Both of them, because we know our country's deteriorating. So I back certain people that help me towards the cause, which is ultimately saving Australia, making it great again, let's say. Romeo Georges and Riccardo Bosi answer this question in different ways, because as you know, as Ricardo always says, there's different lines of operation. Now, when it comes to what Romeo solves, Romeo is a self-described comedian. I'm not saying this is an insult. He's a funny guy. He is very broad. When I first met him, he had 60,000 followers on Facebook. You don't get that from nothing. He's a man of the people. People listen to what he has to say. Riccardo Bosi, when we first met him, he didn't have a following at all on social media. There was no one following him. Yet I saw that
He was
this...
just number 3 on the Australian Conservative Senate ticket.
Exactly. And ultimately, I saw... It was actually number 2. Ultimately, I saw a situation where... this guy, he is answering the question of replacing the political parties, really sticking it to them. So I was like, okay, this is someone I need to give more airtime to. So I've got a political means. I'll act as the sort of alternative media, as the microphone, and Romeo Georges is a man of the people. So the first podcast I launched, it was actually on my... Because I've got 2 podcasts. I've got Thin Ice, which is... I do that interview. I do interviews whenever the hell I want with whoever I want. It's a regular. And then there's The Arc with Riccardo Bosi, which I do on a weekly basis regularly. On the Thin Ice podcast that I launched with Ricardo and Romeo, the whole purpose of it was to introduce a man of the people, Romeo Georges, with Riccardo Bosi, someone who says he wants to represent the people, and sort of put his ideas forward. Now, the importance of that meeting cannot be understated. It was incredibly important. I had a man that had reach, Romeo, and I had a man that wanted to reach the people, had a vision for Australia. And that's really hard, you know. It's very hard to inspire people. Leadership it's a real X factor. It's very hard to find that. So when you find it, you got to hold on to that bloody thing. It is very rare. So if you're able to lead people and you can, more importantly, create a vision for the future for Australia, it's very important you get behind those people. So
what's Ricardo's vision for Australia quickly? I know some people might be familiar with that from our channel.
Yeah.
But he's basically got 5 pillars, but they all revolve around making Australia sovereign, making sure we don't have too many external threats, making sure there's no corruption, things like that, which he feels like the major parties fail at. But you recently he started his own party called Australia One, and he went on, I don't know if it's the right to call it a promotional tour, but at least a tour of Queensland to talk to potential voters. And you went with him as kind of like what I saw as like the kind of Dave Rubin to Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was really good. Queensland's really great. It's people in Australia, they sort of call it the Texas of Australia. It's relatively conservative if you get out there. Ricardo describes the people there as the salt of the earth people. He reckons that if we're in a situation where Donald Trump doesn't get in, he says we might have to accelerate things and move to Queensland. That's how conservative he sees that place. Queensland, it seems like the people there, they were the best to meet. They were really awesome to meet. The purpose of the trip was to spread the news and to sort of go to all these places. So over the course of 29 days, at the end of last year, Ricardo did 20 shows and met all of these supporters. And, you know, they had like 3 hours he'd do a 20-minute presentation, short. And then he'd do 3 hours of just taking the people's questions. 3 hours of no mediator to save his butt. And he just took all of these things. I live streamed one of them in Nicklin. It was insane.
What was your role in those?
Well, to live stream some of them, but also to continue to run the show while I was up there so that I could... The biggest thing I wanted to get up there was to sort of meet the people. But yeah, I wanted to keep the show going, and it was well worth it. We ended up reaching, I think, 1.5 million people with the views we just got from up there, which is awesome.
One question I would have, I'm curious. You spent 29 days basically with Ricardo. I imagine it's basically just kind of you two for, almost 24 hours a day. Does Ricardo have any kind of weird or interesting or quirky habits that you wouldn't guess just by looking at it? Obviously, he's an ex-SAS guy. That'd be something I'd be interested in.
Yeah.
Does he do anything weird? Does he, like... you
go on military
of
time.
Ex-SAS, like when they walk into a room, they check for all the exits and stuff. Does he do anything weird?
Have you guys seen the movies Ip Man?
Yeah.
Have you seen those?
Because I'm a cynophile.
Have you guys seen those?
Yeah.
I haven't seen
That's
it.
all right.
Chinese Kung Fu.
Chinese Kung Fu. What Ip Man used to do in a fight, he'd fight, people with Kung Fu.
He'd fight like 1 million people at one go.
A million in one
Jet
go.
Li style.
You knew the fight was over when he started rolling up his sleeves.
Yeah.
It was just a thing. Sort of a meme. With Ricardo, I picked up on this a few times talking to him. Because, when I do everything with the show, you realize these things. When Ricardo starts talking about a person and he's complimenting them and he uses the word profound.
Yeah.
He's about to wreck their butthole. I'll just put it that way. Okay,
Really?
it's hilarious. The first time I
Like
saw
a
him
real
do it,
person, or is he
no,
describing someone else, or is he
it's
talking to
metaphorically,
He's being
metaphorically,
sarcastic.
metaphorically. So he'll be like, Douglas Murray is a very intelligent and profoundly insightful, intellectual. But, and then it comes. But if he uses the word profound, that's the tell. And he says, but he's given up. We do have hope in the country, even though Douglas Murray is not hopeful. And he did the same thing with Peter Hitchens as well. And I sort of picked up on these things, and it's very strange. I didn't actually spend 29 days with him. I maybe spent about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Because he went far. He didn't just do, because Queensland is a big place, as you know. He went up to like almost as far as Cairns, actually. So he went all the way. But I was mostly with him around Brisbane and the Gold Coast there.
And so is the purpose of that to I mean, obviously it's educational purpose, general good shit, I would say.
Yeah.
Is that though to what's the political angle for that though? Is there potential Senate runs or building a voter base? What's the kind of objectives of that tour that you're involved in?
Well, excuse the pun, but it's about building the arc. He's actually looking at building, it's actually different spelling. The arc for my show is the curve arc, like to turn the country around. His arc is literally the Moses arc that Moses built to survive the flood. Ricardo needs to build the ark with a K. And this, well, what's that?
Noah.
Did I say Noah, not Moses?
You said
Did I say Moses? No, not Moses. Of course, it's
Many
Noah.
times that
Moses is the
Some fucking ethnic.
big difference.
Lebanese
Some Lebanese builder.
Actually, that's a funny segue. The Armenian in the room pointed out that the ark is also in a different place. Where
Descended from Noah.
Oh, is that? You're just saying, there it is.
The Shisha god descended from Noah.
Aren't we all?
It's descended from the Kardashians and from Noah. So therefore, the Kardashians are also descendants of Noah. Is that correct?
That's very, very good.
Noah was slapping some big old ass on that ship.
And the first Christian nation on earth.
Isn't technically everyone a descendant of Noah? Because everyone...
All right, we can't keep having Armin talk because he's not mic'd up. But anyway,
next time. But the point was, Ricardo's building the ark. He visited up there so that he could bring people into the ark, and to sort of lay out the vision and just people to throw everything they had at him, so that he could actually sort of lay out the vision and whether they signed on board or not. So I was just covering it. I'm not even. It's funny. I get the amount of people that hit me up that want to join A1 or a part of A1, and I'm like, I'm actually not with A1. I'm not a part of any party. I'm an individualist. I give credit where it's due.
that was my next question. Good segue, Joel. You read my mind.
Of course. Someone's got to keep this on track.
I know with things like media, podcast, startup, stuff like that, it's hard to have a long-term time frame, right? Because these things are dynamic. But do you see yourself as a media person? Do you see running for office as a potential future for you? Do you see joining a party? Or do you want to stay on the outside being a media voice? And if it is a media voice, in what capacity would you like to participate in kind of the narrative or the conversation in terms of channel growth, things you want to talk about, how you want to influence people? Like, what do you see for yourself in the next kind of 3 years?
There's a few words that come to mind, a few phrases. I see myself as a political commentator first and foremost, but I do see myself also as might even call it a director of what's going on in the conservative movement in Australia to save Australia. Strategist, yeah, that's a good one. But also influencer as well, thought leader. You know, there's a few phrases that come to mind, but it's all to save the country. It all goes back to that. That's the motivation. Let's not forget, I am just a guy that lost my job. That's all it is. And I don't want that to happen to other people. I don't want us to end up in a situation where Australia ends up like Lebanon or some of these Soviet countries, or even fascistic countries like Nazi Germany. I want us to end up in a situation where it's exactly the vision Ricardo lays out. And I can't recite this 100%, but what does he say? It's really brilliant. Australia is a sovereign, self-reliant, independent country or something that is economically powerful, military intimidating, socially cohesive, and culturally vibrant. That is a vision to strive towards. That is awesome. Can you point me to another politician that's laying out that vision? Because if you can, I'll help them too, but unfortunately I can't see that. So formally, I don't want to join any parties. As you know, I've had my run-ins with the Christian Democrat Party, and I'm an individualist, and if politicians are doing a great job, then, that's, I'll help support them. That's it.
Well, as some of the people know, some of the people may not, I joined the Liberal Democrats Party, and in a similar way to you, I didn't want to join a party because I didn't want restrictions on what I wanted, on what I could say, or what I could believe, or who I could support. Now, the reason I joined the Liberal Democrats is that's actually what they say, right? You say whatever you want, support whoever you want, everyone just do their own thing. It's basically their guiding philosophy. Do you see yourself running for office at some stage if, let's say, you maintain your dissatisfaction with the political situation?
Look, I would never rule it out, but the problem I see is, or the advantage I see is, that we're in a situation where I'm currently, and this has happened before, if you watch closely enough, this has happened, where the topics we've covered on the show have directly influenced the decisions of senators and normal representatives in Parliament.
Well, we do know that some important people, I mean, you would have heard this more than us, you got a bigger channel, but through some avenues, we know that there are some, fairly important political people in terms of, their ministry or in the cabinet or whoever who do tune in occasionally. You would find this more than us.
Yeah, and you notice that. And you notice that decisions are made depending on that. So if you can start the avalanche...
Can you give one example?
Yeah, absolutely. The Great Reset. It was the 4th episode of the Ark. We were tiny at the time. The way the episodes went, it went episode 1, 50,000 views, episode 2, 25,000 views, episode 3, 45,000 views, episode 4, The Great Reset, we were the first to cover it in Australia properly, cohesively, where we played the words of Klaus Schwab, 300,000 views. It shot up. We were like, isn't that funny? 2 weeks later, Sky News decided to cover it. I think we normalised it. And once Sky News finally covered it, guess who moved a motion in Parliament 3 weeks after that? Pauline Hanson, Senator Pauline Hanson. And she accomplished something which Ricardo said needed to happen a week before. He said what needs to happen is we need to have a situation where... He was talking about the balance of power. Yeah. Because that's what Australia One wants. If you get the balance of power, you can lead a horse to water, basically. It's sort of a pressure point. You can move the parties to do whatever the hell you want. He said, if we have the balance of power one election, I'm going to go to both parties. I'm going to say, this is what we want. If you don't give it to us, we're going to go to another election. And I said, Ricardo, they'd sooner side with each other and form a government than side with you and form government. And he said, exactly. That's what I want to show. I want to show that these parties are one and the same, and we're the only choice Australians have. Funny thing happened 2 weeks after. That's exactly what happened with Pauline Hanson. She moved the motion for the Great Reset, which no one was talking about until we brought it up. And then we ended up in a situation, and we've known about the Great Reset all year, but it was only after we'd covered it, only a few weeks after, that this motion was moved to oppose the Great Reset. And then we ended up in a situation where Pauline Hanson moved this motion, and only 2 senators backed it, herself and the other One Nation's senator. And that clearly pointed out everyone is in favour of the Great Reset except One Nation.
And so just to give the context, the Great Reset basically refers to an idea, which is that in a COVID-19 represents a perfect opportunity to reset basically the world order as well as the global economy.
That's right.
They present it, and the leaders are kind of the World Economic Forum in particular.
That's right. Yeah.
Charles Schwab, as well as kind of the
UN, WHO probably.
Well, all of those big global, basically taxpayer-funded organisations move to the things that they're driving is a more green economy, especially. So they want to basically supercharge the take-up of renewals. They want to supercharge the redistribution of income. And they also want to basically push as much of the kind of third wave feminist, deconstructionist worldview, whereby they basically disintegrate most of the kind of conservative underpinnings of Western civilization.
For people who are listening, you might think those are 3 kind of distinct, different things. What could they possibly have in common? Why would somebody be motivated to support all 3? The easy question is only one word. It's control, right? If you control the energy supply by deciding that we have to move away from fossil fuels to a green economy, who controls that, right? The green energy companies are not profitable yet themselves, as far as I'm aware. So what do they require? Subsidies. What does that mean? The government needs to take the revenues from existing fossil fuel services and put them into green energy. Government control. Redistribution of income. What does that mean? Government takes everybody's income and redistributes it to, the people that they see fit, while taking a nice cut for themselves along the way. Government control. Now, third wave feminism, right? What does that require? Social engineering, corporate board policy, all of these different things for third wave feminism to take up, all come back to government control. So if you're wondering what's the common theme across, it is control. And, I'm sure that there are some, very well motivated people who kind of believe these ideas, but my belief, and Joel and Alex and Andy may or may not share this belief, is that the people who actually pull the strings behind it, they don't see these as kind of three separate issues which, on the balance of rational objectivity, they fell on one side and decided that these were the most important issues for the civilization. I think that's a very low probability chance. The much higher probability chance is that the people at the top who really pull the strings behind these organizations decided that, hey, this is a great opportunity for us to put our ideology, it doesn't even matter what the ideology is, this is just the excuse to put our ideology into the lives of everyday citizens.
It all comes back to power, usurping it. And it took me the longest time to work this out. There's a great video I did of Paul.
You have a lot of great videos, Joel.
Yeah, this is not one of my own, actually. I just edited it. This is one of John Anderson's, the former Prime Minister John Anderson, Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson's videos, where he was sitting down with Douglas Murray, and they were talking about basically the disintegration of the world, what's happening. He said, John Anderson was saying, it just seems like they seem to be, these discussions we're having with the disintegrationists about identity politics and everything, it's about pulling America apart, or Australia apart, or the West apart. And Douglas Murray interrupts him and says, what if that's the point? And John's like, and then Douglas Murray says, what if that's the point? And then there's this, I edited it so the pause was a lot longer, and then there was some funny music that played at the end. Because the old they hadn't heard before.
Can I ask you, Joel? Yeah. You prefaced the kind of your support or relationship with Riccardo Bosi with the disintegration of Australia.
Yeah.
And you broadly spoke about the disintegration of the world, or what do you see as the real kind of points of disintegration? Because I agree with you on a range of points that there identity politics, government control, you can continue down the list, which is going to hurt Australia and hurt the world. There's also parts of me which says that right now is the best time to live, if you were to choose to live at any point in history. There's also a part of me that says, we lift 100,000 people out of absolute poverty every single day. Can you explain a bit more broadly what you see as the disintegration?
When it comes to the major things facing Australia on a very deep level, ultimately and this is very philosophical, ultimately we don't have a story anymore. The stories that have given us the fuel to run for so long and hard and fast as we have was Christianity. Ultimately it was the basis. That's where we got marriage from. That's where we abolished slavery from. That's where we got all these economic sort of systems for. It created stability so that we could have economic freedom.
It really starts in Genesis, doesn't it, Joel? That the individual man was created in the image of God, which gives every single person a value which cannot be violated. That's the base of capitalism and individual people voting every day with their wallets, base of democracy, where every single person gets a vote because their vote is just as valuable as somebody else's vote. It's the basis of the rule of law, that the rule of law applies to every single person equally.
That's right.
It's those institutions that you're thinking about.
No, exactly. And you've answered your own question there. That it's the basis. It is the bedrock of what makes the civilization, the cogs move. And the problem is, once you start undermining it, it doesn't matter how good your bloody constitution is, you can't govern immoral people. You just can't. It doesn't matter how good the US Constitution is. That's why, you have these checks and balances here and there in the US Constitution, which is a phenomenal document, the way they built it. But if the people aren't right, if the people are so corrupt to the core and immoral and they don't believe in truth anymore, then you're going to have a situation where you're going to get to the last safeguard and it's still going to fail. Then you're going to go through, as Ricardo says, 1,000 years of darkness before you actually can return back to the point where people are like, okay, let's go back to basics. That's the problem. Maybe we do have to go through this crisis. Maybe we will fail this time around. I hope not. Maybe we'll have to come back in 60 years and solve all this stuff when we're 80 years old. We'll be the forefathers. We'll be the John Andersons guiding the next generation because our country would have fallen into, maybe and I mean just look at and that's why I keep describing this as chapters. Each country is at a different chapter in this. That's why when you get countries like, Armenians coming to Australia, or you get Venezuelans going to America, and they're warning people, they're saying you will lose these freedoms. You need to bloody listen to those people because they might know something you don't know. That's one aspect. That's sort of the deepest aspect, and it's never talked about by the conservative movement because you've got to stay away from religion and be inclusive and all that bull crap. Australians are very shy about talking about the importance of Christ in their life. Meanwhile, you've got the Middle East, you've got the Christians in the Middle East, like some of my cousins who have been beheaded for their faith by Islamists. They're willing to die because of it. Another aspect of this is the because that's one aspect, and that's been under assault from the secular humanist sort of side. Another aspect is, of course, the socialist side and the communist side, which is trying to... Basically, people aren't taught what they're meant to be taught.
Well, they're probably related in the sense that once you take away the individual value of people, then the value is placed in the government.
Yeah, that's right. They need a god. They look for it somewhere else. And I mean, the long march through the institutions is where you need to study that. It's very simple. Basically, the communists professors in America, especially in the 50s, 60s, they... Who was it? Antonio Gramsci.
Yeah, Gramsci, and there was another guy I'll think of his name in a second, who was the first person to bring over critical theory.
That's right.
Yeah, so there's Horkheimer, Adorno, and Mercuse, so the Frankfurt School, the three guys who came over from Frankfurt in Germany and then founded, and they were started.
Quick backstory on the Frankfurt School for people who don't know. Basically, there was a really rich, there was a kid who was the son of a rich guy, and by kid I mean probably a guy that's like 30. Very caught up in the socialist thing, Messiah complex, as young kids tend to get, like us. Think they know how to save the world. So what he did was, with his dad's money, he built a school, a university, got all the best socialist professors from Europe, communist professors, paid them a bunch of money, taught in Germany. Now, when Hitler took over, he was like, didn't like the socialists. Now, we don't like Hitler either. Just preface that. We don't like that guy. So then what happened was a lot of them were Jews as well, right? These communist socialists, a lot of them were Jews. So then they came to America, and obviously you get a lot of these academics who sit in the library all day. They can't they go back into universities in America. And so then that's how the critical theory starts. That's how intersectional feminism starts. That's how everything which is opposed to the individual rights professed in, let's say, the best piece of Western political theory in the Constitution comes under assault.
That's right.
Well,
that's right.
The key thing with the Frankfurt School is basically what happened was communist theory basically dictates that after kind of like a substantial upheaval, what is supposed to happen is there's supposed to be a revolution of the proletariat, which is that the proletariat is supposed to rise up, assume the means of production, and take over. Now, unfortunately, in post-World War, they had to explain why that occurred in Russia, and it didn't occur anywhere else. And so basically kind of the fundamental basis of communism, I guess the formula that Marx put forward could not be validated in the terms that he provided.
That was also in tandem with, in the post-World War II economic booms all across the Western world in particular, where the working classes were doing so much better. Every year the wages were going up, the living conditions were improving.
Exactly right.
Like, the Australian working class apparently is famous in communist thought because they were very happy to go and work their jobs, get increases in their wages, buy a house for themselves, but basically do their work and go to the beach. And they didn't want to overthrow the government. They were just happy with that life.
Yeah.
And it defied all of the academic theory which preceded it.
Yeah, so just quickly, the final point is that then these guys had to explain or adapt the Marxist critical theory, which is kind of this, basically relies on the dialectic, this dialectic principle, but there's a synthesis, there's a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. So it's like a historical theory.
Hegel.
It's basically Hegel, but Marx was one of the first people to apply it to history. And so that kind of ties into the whole idea of the revolution, and particularly the revolution of the peasants. But then what they did was, instead of saying that it's an economic thing, they tried to apply that critical theory to everything else and basically turned it into a social theory.
Because the economic theory failed.
Because the economic theory failed, they weren't able to validate through historical evidence actually the Marxist theory. They then turned it, the oppressed narrative, to male, female, to father, son, to
everything,
the church and the people. But they don't. They see that the government is actually the means by which they can relieve everyone, not just the proletariat, but everyone from the yoke, from the burden of kind of the capitalist system.
Yeah, and that's why I said it all comes back to power earlier on. It ultimately, that's what matters in the end.
It's some hot shit. And to specify what Alex was saying about oppressor versus oppressed class, in the economic lens, in the economic theory, the oppressor was the capitalist, the oppressed were the working class. That didn't work. The working class were actually very happy with the situation they were in.
And continually better off.
Okay, we're back on. Sorry for all these audio difficulties. Joel's about to have a spiel, he tells me. And so what I was going to say is that in the economic theory, you had the capitalists oppressing the working class. That didn't work out, as Alex said, because the working class were continually better off and they didn't assume the means of production. So that's both the economical and historical invalidation. So then under the umbrella of intersectional feminism, this is going to be the hot take, is that it wasn't actually about real social analysis. It was just about transposing the Marxist framework of oppressor versus oppressed from working class capitalist to straight versus gay, to cis versus trans or unspecified, to Christian versus other, to straight versus whatever. I might have already repeated some, but you get the idea, and you'll be familiar with that because you would have seen it both in your boardroom policy and in your classrooms. Yeah. So that's kind of the situation we're dealing with from our perspective. And as Joel mentioned, it comes back to power. And Joel, I'm going to toss this football to you.
Why do we bring this up? Because that's a great sort of background into where it comes from. I bring it up because these very people that when the collapse of the Berlin Wall happened, we were in a situation where we found that what they were doing didn't work. The Soviet Union failed. The proletariat didn't rally. So rather than taking power by force, they had to take it by controlling the mind of the people. How do they do that? Well, a good example of this is if you go through the 45 Goals of Communism. It's a lot of
goals.
It's a lot of goals. I'm actually going through it this week with Ricardo. Now,
check that.
How do you influence the people and capture the public mind? It's by capturing the institutions, by capturing the cultural aspects. What does that include? That includes the media. That includes Hollywood. That includes the polling institutes. That includes all the other schools. Everything. If you do that and you capture the mind, then all the buildings, when you have your revolutions, all the buildings will stay the same. The flag will be the same, yet everything inside would have changed. It would have been completely rotted, and so that you could do your peaceful revolution.
Can I ask you, Joel? This is one question I have, though, right? This is one thing I don't understand. I'm on board with you. Everything you've said is that the long march through the institutions is done by people, in my estimation, who don't have something personal to gain.
Okay.
Right? The teachers who teach the intersectional feminism are not going to go and get an economic benefit from teaching intersectional feminism. The people who go out in the street and march at Black Lives Matters or whatever other protest are not going to get a direct personal benefit, although some are, undeniably paid by Soros. Why do you think it is that people... I think it can tie back to the lack of religion that we talked to before and the need to find a new God. But why do you think it is that conservatives are not engaging on these battlefronts, or have historically not engaged on these battlefronts in the institutions, let people on the other side, on the progressive side, fight that battle while they watch. And so then they don't become, well, you know, they have jobs, they have kids, they have everything. So it means they don't actually fight a battle. What they become is a silent majority or a silent sector of the population who don't raise their voice in companies, in the HR policies, who don't fight in universities and schools, who don't fight in governments. What's your diagnosis of why it is that progressives can take up that battle so fiercely and why they have? And is there a solution to that problem?
Look, if you don't have kids, then it's easy to fight the battles. I mean, look at me. Look how much I do everything for what I'm doing. Reach 6 million people in 5 months, and
sure, but you're filling the gap. You're filling the gap of what people haven't traditionally done.
My point is, I'm making a point as to what you can do when you don't have kids and you don't have a relationship. There's a lot you can do. Imagine having millions of those people and what you can accomplish. People who are living off the dole. People where you cut. You said, I've got to disagree with you on this, Dougal. You said they have nothing to gain. They have everything to gain. I mean, are you kidding me? Look at it, these professors will lose their job if they don't toe the party line. How many times have we seen that? They won't get tenure. And they're educating all of these students into the right way. So you've got people who are doing this to usurp power in a certain way. But you've also got people who are fully indoctrinated to the core, who have gone through the entire school system. Then you've got other people. It's a psychological phenomenon, and you've got to look at these things on an individual basis. When you mentioned protesters in the street, what are they protesting? Okay, let's take an example. People that were on Wall Street and they were protesting against, this was Occupy Wall Street back in 2011, and they were very frustrated that the 99% weren't getting their fair share as the 1%. The 1% had all the wealth. And, they had some good points. It's a psychological phenomenon. People, and it also goes back to, benefits as well. I mean, in Australia, we've got Centrelink. We've got a situation where why would someone want their Centrelink benefits to be cut off over here? They're going to want them increased. They're going to want more. When was the last time an Australian government actually cut benefits? Or even America?
Alex, you'll know this. There was some famous person, I think, in America who said when you give people the option to vote for free money for themselves, that then your country starts going downhill.
I don't remember who said that, but that sounds like something someone would say.
Does
I
sound
would
like
read.
that you would read.
I was listening to Greg Sheridan talk with John Anderson recently, and he was talking with Greg Sheridan was recalling a conversation he had with Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger said, every government around the world has lost the ability to be fiscally responsible. They can no longer go to their population and their
Who's Greg Sheridan, by the way? I've
Greg,
heard of him.
He's a very big writer at the Australian. He's excellent. He's the foreign correspondent there. Anyway, he was recalling this conversation with what's his name?
Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger was basically saying government officials can no longer ask their people to sacrifice anything. They just can't do it anymore. And look, that speaks a lot to the inner problems we've got with us as a nation. But it's the truth. Not even Donald Trump said, even he promised when he ran in 2016, I will not touch your social security stuff. All of that,
It's a bit of what can you do for your country, not what your country do for you.
Yeah, it's more AOC. What can your country do for you, not what you can do for your country.
Well, then from there, so Joel, we talked about the problems that are arising. If you were Prime Minister tomorrow, and let's just say not just Prime Minister, you had absolute authority tomorrow to change the legislation to do whatever you would want.
Hypothetically, to act in the still democracy.
Yeah, exactly right. Dictator Joel. What would be the top three
Democratic dictator
legislative
Joel.
amendments you would make? So I reckon it's super easy for us to sit around and talk about the problems, but what are the actual top three solutions, practical policy solutions as well? Because you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, we just want to have a conversation.
It's easy to
we
be
we don't want to, have a seat at the table, whatever."
Yeah, it's boring.
Boring. What are the three things? Top three.
No, I get it. Let me just preface this by saying we're probably fucked. Probably. I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand half the crap I'm talking about when it comes to economics. There's a ton of things I don't understand. I don't understand what happens when my parents, before my dad passed away, we had a conversation in late 2019. We sat down and he was talking with us kids, and he said, are you guys going to think about buying property sometime soon? At the time, we're all employed. He's like, are you thinking about this, for the future? And I said, Dad, 2020, there are about 9 things I can list off for you, 9 events happening in 2020, where even if, and these are things like the US election, Brexit, there was a bunch of these things. And I said, even if I knew the outcome of these events, I still wouldn't know how that would influence the economy. And this was all just me trying to make a decision on whether I buy a house or not, or a unit or whatever. I said, I will not buy in 2020. Best decision I ever made, as we saw, the shit show that 2020 was. But the point is, I want to preface this by saying I don't know what to do with the country. I just don't. But what the things I'm certain about is we need to improve the public debating sphere. We need to learn to elevate the right decisions and intelligent discussion again. If we can't, we're not going to find our way out of this.
Alex, why don't you provide? Oh, Andy, you want to say something?
I do have some. I do have some
Joel?
benefits. Like just ones I can think about is cutting taxes. Just seems like a really obvious way we could have done this. Why are we handing out money and printing out money as we saw in the US, which has printed 66% of their cash this year? Where in the last 10 months they've printed 66% of it, which is insane. In the last 10 months. Why are we doing that when we could have been cutting taxes? That'd be one of the first things I'd investigate. Why are there decisions like the Bradfield scheme which haven't been approved? Why is it that we haven't brought in nuclear? Those are just 3 things.
Take out Australia from the UN?
Yeah, probably. I don't see why we need to be in it. I just don't get it.
Alex, what are your top 3?
So top 3, definitely number 1 is tax. So I think tax is a ridiculous issue that we have in Australia. So even under a Liberal government, we have if you're in the top tax bracket, you're paying, I think it's about 48 cents on the dollar. Now, if you are paying 48 cents on the dollar and you are some of the most productive individuals in the country, that's perhaps the worst incentive to earn more money and basically create income for other people as well. So number 1. So I wouldn't just cut taxes, I'd make it a flat tax rate. I'd say 20% flat tax.
I think that's Ricardo's policy, just so I can butt in. He says 20% flat tax, and then he also goes a step further and says 10% for rural to encourage people getting 100%. Out there.
Well, for example, like we talk about the farmers, and I don't like subsidies, but for one thing, I'd be happy with a 5% tax rate for farmers. That's no dramas for me.
5%. I would even. You could say that. You could extend that to like essential services.
Yeah.
You say doctors, nurses.
For example, car manufacturing. I would say there is a 5-year tax break for anyone who builds cars in Australia, right? Anyone who produces steel in Australia, 5-year tax break.
Yeah.
Because I think if you have to explain to a government why you get to keep your own money, they don't work for you, you work for them, right? Because they're your boss at that point. Second thing, I would reduce, obviously, any restrictions on nuclear energy. I think that's basically standard. You should be able to have stable, reliable baseload power, even if it is in 5-10 years.
Yeah, and can I just ask you the question, because I've said this before, would you say get rid of everything around Australia, all other energy, everything can be nuclear? Would you shut down every...
No, it's free market.
Probably allow the market.
If you can be profitable, 100%.
Okay,
if you want to build a coal-fired power station in your backyard, in the middle of Orange or something like that, go for it. As long as your neighbours are okay.
Yeah, no, I'm all for the free market, but this is more of a compromising thing. I've had this discussion with Daniel Alejandro Rodriguez, the socialist. I've said, okay, let's reach a compromise. Close down every coal-fired power station, and then we can all have just nuclear. Can we get on board with that? But you also have to shut down the green stuff too. And he said, "Yep, let's do it." So look, but
that's
I don't want to get sidetracked.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But at the same time, like there are plenty of hardworking people who work at coal-fired power stations.
Yeah.
I think you should, if you can make it profitable, go for it.
Free market's the way.
So that'd probably be the 2 things, top 2, and then the third thing would be, I would
Something cultural, something a feel good something.
Free mandatory girlfriends.
Andy, we're not all in the same position as you.
And we're not all struggling, man.
I was in Alex's shoes. I'm not.
We're getting to you, Andos. Don't worry, mate.
So third thing, something cultural.
Free haircuts for Andy.
We've got the same haircut.
I would say anyone or any business who mandatorily restricts someone's freedom of speech, that's basically a criminal offence. I would say. You can do it in your own business, but you can't go beyond the scope of the law.
Yeah.
Like what it already is. But I would also get rid of anti-discrimination legislation. That's a hot take.
18C?
Yeah, I would get rid of all of that, 100%.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I think anti-discrimination thing is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
So so securing the First and Second Amendment, it's not a bad idea, is it?
100%. And the reason is people say, oh, well, Alex, like, won't that encourage racism? It's like, yeah, maybe, but it's like at the same time, if you are an Indian Australian and you only want to hire Indians and you start a business, go for it. Like, I've got absolutely no dramas with that.
That's right.
And we essentially have anti-discrimination legislation. Like, you can kick people out of your own house if you want to. Why shouldn't you be able, because it's your property, why shouldn't you be able to kick someone out of your own business because you want to?
Exactly. And
I've got no dramas with that.
And we saw it in the US that you end up sending the other places broke that decide not to be inclusive.
Free market. That's how the free market works.
Exactly.
It's the non-inclusive businesses. And you actually see it all the time. Like, in apartheid South Africa, it was the businesses that actually hired black people that did so much better than the ones that didn't, even though there were restrictions, because the black people, in some instances, were willing to work harder. They had they were more willing to do some of the manual work.
But also people who were willing to buy. The buyers were probably in favour of inclusive policies.
Yeah, exactly right. I say let the free market work it out. Like, if we're happy to say you should be able to discriminate against who comes into your own house, and that should apply to every single piece of property you own.
Okay, one thing.